Um, Hello students, welcome to your class on contemporary critical theory. Yesterday we had read or critically analyzed the story Purloin Letter. So today we'll just try to understand the theories of Lacan. So I won't go like into the details of like his life and history. So if you want to read that, you can just click onto any link and find the details of his birth and all this. I'll just focus on this part which is important as a psychiatrist, Lacan as a psychiatrist, like his psychoanalytical theories. What is psychoanalysis? So, from its inception, psychoanalysis has presented and understood itself as a liberating theory and practice. So, Freud and his pupils considered psychoanalysis both in its theoretical and practical aspects an enterprise that could free us from all kinds of oppressive cultural norms. Particularly with regard to sexuality, if we speak about, psychoanalysis was though to be a threat to bourgeois sexual culture. Along the same lines, Lacan introduced the apocryphal story that while on their way to the United States in 1909, Freud told Jung that they were bringing the plague to the new world. That means a sort of revolution which was not going to be accepted by the old world. So clearly, Lacan also saw psychoanalysis as a revolutionary movement with regard to the psychiatric and cultural establishment. And when we basically talk about understanding the Lacanian theory, then we can say that Lacan read Freud, or the other saying which is very popular about Lacanian theory or Lacan is that wherever there is Freud, you'll find Lacan. That means both of them go hand in hand. So it is hard to deny that Freudian psychoanalysis in many respects had a liberating potential, and that psychoanalysis did not contribute to profound change in our cultural and moral landscape. But basically, we'll focus here more into like what Lacan had to say, though, as I said, his theories are more based on the reading of Freud. The basic purpose here, as I said, is to understand the structure of psyche as explained or as analyzed by Lacan. Lacan said that psyche can be divided into three major structures that control our lives and our desire. So most of Lacan's many terms for the full complexity of the psyche's working can be related to these three major concepts. So we are going to like analyze these three structure one by one. So that will help you in understanding his theories, and obviously the paper or the seminar which he had presented on Purloin Letter. So which correlate roughly to the three main moments in the individual's development as outlined in the Lacan module on psychosexual development. So this is like obviously related to the development of a child. So we are not going to the detail of this psychosexual development, because our purpose here is like to understand what is reality, what are like two other elements related to the structure of psyche as discussed by Lacan. So the first thing that he discusses is the real. This concept marks the state of nature from which we have been forever severed by our entrance into language. That means we have entered the language, yes, and then we are like in a way depleted or severed from the reality or the real nature of its existence. Only as a neonatal children are we close to this state of nature, a state in which there is nothing but need. So that need or that reality is present only among the neonatal children, as is said by Lacan. So a baby needs and seeks to satisfy those needs with no sense for any separation between itself and the external world or the world of others. For this reason, Lacan sometimes represents his state of nature as a time of fullness or completeness that is subsequently lost through the entrance into language. So once we enter the world of language, we lose that control, or we lose that connection which is with the nature. So the primordial animal need for copulation, for example, animals are in heat, similarly correspond to this state of nature also. So there is a need flowed by search of for satisfaction as far as human are concerned. However, the real is impossible, as Lacan was fond of saying, because that reality cannot be attended, because we have moved into something different through language. So that is what Lacan always tries to say. So it is impossible insofar as we cannot express it in language, because very entrance into language marks our irrevocable separation from the real. That means the moment we have entered the world of language, we have entered or we have gone to a very different world or separated from the reality. Because there are like many critics and theorists who say that language limits your expressions. It doesn't broaden your expression, but it limits your expression, because there are like limited words to express things in your surrounding. So we are confined or we are limited by the words. We are not broadened, but actually we are limited by the words. That's why here he is saying that language marks our irrevocable separation from the real. That means we move away from the reality when we start using language. And that is the basic difference, because when we talk about Derrida or like Freud basically spoke about, the structure, the different concept of the brain, especially when we talk about Freud. So he spoke about those dimensions which were not very expressible, those emotions or those feelings which could not be expressed. But Lacan tried to give words to those expressions. That means he tried to give language aspect to those feelings or those like concept which Freud was talking about. So still the real continues to exert its influence throughout our adult lives, since it is the rock against which all our fantasies and linguistic structure ultimately fail. So the real, for example, continues to erupt whenever we are made to acknowledge the materiality of our existence, an acknowledgement that is usually perceived as traumatic, since it threatens our very reality, although it also derives Lacan's sense of jouissance. So here we move on to the next concept, that is of imaginary order. So this concept corresponds to the mirror stage. If you want to go into the detail, then you'll have to see what is mirror stage. These are like different stages of the growth of a child, of a human being. So this is the Lacan module of psychosexual development, and marks the movement of the subject from primal need to what Lacan terms demand. That is, he is moving further away from the reality, and this obviously comes in the mirror stage. So as the connection to the mirror stage suggests, the imaginary is primarily narcissistic, that means egoistic, which is related to yourself, even though it sets the stage for the fantasies of desire, for Lacan's understanding of desire. So whereas needs can be fulfilled, demands are by definition unsatisfiable, and demands are more related to our ego, or as is said by Lacan, it is narcissistic. So here the same thing he said. So in other words, we are already making the movement into the sort of lack of that, for Lacan defines the human subject. Once a child begins to recognize that its body is separate from the world and its mother, it begins to feel anxiety. That means till now it did not realize that it has got a separate existence from its mother, but gradually as it grows up, it realizes that it has got a separate existence and it has an identity different from its mother. Till a state of time when the baby is too small, all his needs are being fulfilled or are fulfilled by the mother. But when he starts gradually growing up, he has to meet his demands. Those needs are no more needs, but they are demands, because it is more related to the ego. You must have seen the child being stubborn sometimes, or like very insistent about something, something very demanding sometimes. So this is what he is talking about. So it begins to feel anxiety, so which is caused by a sense of something lost. So according to Lacan, inextricably intertwined and work in tension with the real. So there is a tension, there is intertwined work of tension. Now here the demand of the child then is to make the other a part of itself, as it seemed to be in the child's now lost state of nature. So that is the neonatal months, during the time when the child is too small. So the child's demand is therefore impossible to realize and function ultimately as a reminder of loss of lack. So it is the difference between demand and desire, which is the function of symbolic order, is simply the acknowledgement of language, law and community in the later. The demand of imaginary does not proceed beyond a dyadic relation between the self and the object one wants to make a part of oneself. So the mirror stage corresponds to this demand in so far as the child misrecognizes in its mirror image a stable, coherent, whole self, which however does not correspond to the real child and is therefore impossible to realize. That means he has started realizing his existence. So this is the stage which is like referred to as the mirror stage. So the image is a fantasy, one that the child sets up in order to compensate for its sense of lack of loss, because if he will not set a fantasy or image about himself, he will be lost. He will not be able to recognize himself, right? So what Lacan terms an idle I or idle ego. So that fantasy image of oneself can be filled in by others who we may want to emulate in our adult lives, like role models, etc., etc. So anyone that we set up as a mirror for ourselves in what is ourselves in what is ultimately a narcissistic relationship. That means relationship which are established because of our ego, which are based on our ego. So we must be what must be remembered is that for Lacan, this imaginary realm continues to exert its influence throughout the life of the adult and is not merely superseded or outmoded. After some time, that when child grows up, like there are many things which he must have done, or many activities which he tend to forget. Like if you ask a grown up person about his activities or like his action during childhood, then most of the things are outmoded or like it is out of his mind, or he won't remember the things. So child's movement into the symbolic. So this is the child's movement into the symbolic, into the imaginary and the symbolic. Now here, what is the symbolic order? This is the third component of his structure, it's Lacan's structure. So whereas the imaginary is all about equation and identification, the symbolic is about language and narrative. So once a child enters into language and accepts the rules and dictates of society. Why it is called dictates of the society? Because it has got into a framework which is set by the society. So it is able to deal with others. So now it has understood the structure of the society and it is able to understand the dictates of the society. The acceptance of language's rule is aligned with the Oedipus complex according to Lacan. That means we understand the world with the help of the language, or there is a language rule which is like aligned. So we have to, or by this time the child is able to understand the rule of the language. Just take for example, if I say that he is calling a chair, not because his real self has taught him to understand that it is a chair. It is symbolic. Symbolic, like we say signifier and the signified. There is a word signifier and the chair is a signified. And this rule is this is the rule of the language which has been said by the world. So he has to understand it this way, that he is if we are talking about something like chair, so it is signifier and the signified is the chair. So it is symbolic. The word is just symbolic and the original, the thing is something different which has got a different existence, right? So here, so and that is what he has to accept, or that is what he understands gradually when he grows up. So here, so the symbolic is made possible because of your acceptance of the name of the Father, those laws and restrictions that control both your desire and the rules of communication. So everything is controlled by the communication, or everything is controlled by language. This is what is the difference, or the basic difference between Lacan and Freud. So it is the name of the Father that we must recognize the support of the symbolic function, which from the dawn of history has identified his person with the figure of the law. That means if I don't have, or I don't remember the name of my father, then I don't have a related identity. That means I must relate myself to some origin, some beginning. So through recognition of the name of the Father, you are able to enter into a community of others. This is symbolic, right? So the symbolic through language is the pact which links subject together in one action. It is symbolic. It doesn't matter if we talk about the reality or the real thing. If we go beyond this structure which is laid laid by the society, then obviously the symbols have got no significance. But when we come to the society, when we try to understand this structure, then we know that all these symbolic things are very, very significant. They have made the structure for us, but obviously we don't go that deeper into the thought to realize all these things, because we are programmed and we don't think it is something out of the way. But if we start applying the same thing to the animals, do you think we will be able to accommodate with this structure? No, they will take a lot of time to understand all these things. Fine. So this is what is here. So the human action par excellence is originally founded on the existence of the world of the symbol, namely on the laws and contracts. So the primary imaginary relation provides the fundamental framework for all possible eroticism. So it is a condition to which the object of eros as such must be submitted. The object relation must always submit to the narcissistic framework and be inscribed in it. A creature needs some reference to the beyond of language, to a pact, to a commitment which constitutes him, strictly speaking, as an other, a reference included in the general, or to be more exact, universe system of interhuman symbols. No love can be functionally realizable in the human community save by means of specific pact, which whatever the form it takes, always tends to become isolated off into a specific function at one and the same time within language and outside of it. So if we talk about all these things, then we can just come to this, that whereas the real concerns need and the imaginary concerns demand, the symbol is all about desire. So according to Lacan, once we enter into language, our desire is forever afterwards bound up with the play of the language. That means if I desire to have a piece of chocolate and I don't know what exactly it is called, then obviously my desire will not be fulfilled, because I need to have, or I need to put that into a symbol or into a language. Otherwise, I won't be able to fulfill my desire. That's why it is dependent on symbols. Fine. So that is what he is trying to say. And we should keep in mind, however, that the real and the imaginary continue to play a part in the evolution of human desire within the symbolic order. So it has kept on evolving, the real and the imaginary. Right. So the fact that our fantasies always fail before the real, for example, ensure that we continue to desire in the symbolic order, could in fact be said to be our way to avoid coming into full contact with the real. So that desire is ultimately most interested not in obtaining the object of desire, but rather in reproducing itself. So narcissism of the imaginary is also crucial for the establishment of desire, according to Lacan. So the primary imaginary relation provides the fundamental framework for all possible erotism. It is a condition to which the object of eros as such must be submitted. The object relation must always submit to the narcissist framework and be inscribed in it. So for Lacan, love begins here. However, to make that love functionally realizable, so that is to move it move beyond scopholic, the subject must reinscribe that narcissistic imaginary relation into the laws and contracts of the symbolic order. So the real and the imaginary and the symbolic thus work together to create the tension of our psychodynamic selves. That means if we talk about the psyche, then it is somehow related to the reality, right? So this world is interconnected, the real, imaginary, the symbolic, everything is interconnected, and this becomes becomes this psychodynamic self of ours. So that's all for today, and we'll discuss the next topic tomorrow. Thank you all.